Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating scientific mystery. How exactly does a solo researcher working out of a home office reach the exact same profound conclusions as world-class scientific institutions? We usually picture breakthrough science happening in massive, multi-million-dollar labs, right? But this is a story about the origins of intelligence, how our brains evolved, the very building blocks of life, and crucially, how artificial intelligence is completely democratizing the whole process of scientific discovery. We've got some incredible ground to cover today, and honestly, the parallel discoveries we're going to look at are just mind-blowing. Okay, let's dive into this. The whole thing started with one core question that launched a modest but super powerful project known as PVME. The question was this: if we begin with only the most fundamental abilities, how far can intelligence actually emerge? PVME is basically an acronym for its specific framework for building an artificial mind. Now, to be clear, this project wasn't trying to build some all-knowing artificial general intelligence, and it wasn't trying to magically solve the hard problem of consciousness. It really just wanted to start from absolute scratch and ask, hey, if we start with just the basic tools a living organism has, how far can a system grow through pure observation and experience? So to test this, the PFVME project took a radically simple approach. Instead of feeding an AI billions of human-labeled images or those massive data sets you always hear about, which is how pretty much all machine learning works today, this system was designed to just observe. It watched the world through a single stationary camera. We're talking raw visual data here, basic physics, light, shadow, simple geometric shapes, and just watching how objects in a room stayed stable or changed over hours and days. The system had to figure out movement and relationships completely on its own, through totally unguided experience. It was a true, ground-up experiment in letting a system build its own understanding of the environment. But here's the thing. What made this work wasn't just the code itself. It was the philosophy behind it. The creator had this strict personal rule: never become emotionally attached to an idea. The only thing that matters is what the evidence shows. And honestly, this intense humility, it was the project's absolute superpower. The creator would routinely just toss out entire software architectures, literally throwing away months of painstaking failed code the second the evidence showed it wasn't working. Sure, AI made it possible to code fast, but it was this relentless willingness to just set pride aside and follow the facts that led the project to stumble into some incredibly familiar scientific territory. And this brilliantly illustrates our first major parallel. Because they stuck so strictly to the evidence, PFVME concluded early on that vision absolutely had to come before higher intelligence. It figured out that the physical act of observing and mapping the environment was the foundational building block for a true mind. Now, entirely independently, a massive anthropological study by researchers at Duke University arrived at that exact same conclusion about our own evolutionary history. They found that vision, not the reasoning centers in the frontal lobe, was the primary driver in the biological development of primate brains. Let's unpack those Duke findings for a second. For the longest time, paleontologists kind of assumed our complex brains were driven by a rapidly growing frontal lobe, since that's the area we associate with advanced reasoning, right? But by rigorously analyzing 3D digital models of fossilized ancient skulls, researchers found the frontal lobe actually grew pretty predictably compared to the rest of the body. What really exploded in growth were the visual processing regions. Ancient primates with the largest neocortices also had massively expanded optic nerves. Basically, high-definition vision was the real engine behind brain expansion, which is the exact same architectural starting point PFVME independently chose for its AI. Pretty wild, right? As the PFVME project kept building its artificial visual system, it ran into a technical reality. Seeing couldn't just happen all at once. It needed distinct stages to process all that massive visual data without completely crashing. Fascinatingly, institutional research from the EPFL in Switzerland perfectly validates this. They discovered that human brains edit visual reality in very distinct biological steps. First, there's an early unconscious encoding stage that takes about 200 milliseconds. Then, a later stage at about 450 milliseconds, where conscious integration actually happens. It's kind of like a live broadcast delay on TV. Your brain takes in the raw data, holds it, edits it, and only then presents a cohesive picture to your consciousness. Conscious vision isn't a live video feed. It's a delayed, edited movie. And the specific processing steps PFVME was trying to code, they mirrored human neurobiology almost perfectly. Eventually, though, the project hit a massive wall. PFVME ran into severe software roadblocks when it tried to model a true mind purely in code. It became super apparent that processing data and having a genuine, subjective experience are two completely different things. Now, what's really interesting about this architectural dead end is that it aligns beautifully with a philosophical concept called biological naturalism, which is heavily championed by philosopher Peter Godfrey Smith. So you have an independent AI researcher and an institutional philosopher arriving at the exact same profound realization about the hard limits of computation. As Godfrey Smith argues, what a system does is dependent on its physical makeup in ways that actually matter to having a mind. Basically, he's suggesting that consciousness isn't just a software program you can pop into any piece of hardware. You can't just transfer a human mind onto a thumb drive. A computer processes things fundamentally differently than a living, breathing brain. The actual physical, biological reality of the hardware absolutely matters when we talk about feeling, suffering, and truly experiencing the world. I mean, think about it. A brain isn't made of silicon chips. It requires strict biological necessities. It's this astoundingly complex organ made of bounded living cells, constantly consuming glucose, interacting through tiny chemical releases, and relying heavily on electrical oscillations and physical rhythms pulsing across cell membranes. PFVME's realization that traditional AI software has these hard, impenetrable limits when it comes to replicating consciousness, it perfectly reflects those physical truths. True experience seems to strictly require biology. Let's move to the origins of life itself to see how this builds. Realizing that simple software just wasn't going to cut it, the PFVME project started searching for how basic, fundamental systems interact to create something greater. And this maps beautifully onto the work of Hungarian biologist Tibor Ganti. Ganti developed the chematon theory, which is a comprehensive model of the absolute simplest possible living organism. Remarkably, his foundational work was actually ignored behind the Iron Curtain for decades. But today, it's highly respected by modern biologists who are trying to understand the genesis of life. Ganti argued that every living organism, no matter how simple, requires three interconnected systems. Number one, a metabolism, basically a chemical motor to process energy, build itself, and maintain its structure. Number two, an information storage system, like genes, to pass on its blueprints. And number three, a physical boundary, like a lipid membrane, to contain the whole shebang. These systems can't exist in isolation. If they aren't all interacting dynamically, the system just disperses into the environment. Ganti's vision of life as this network of cooperating, self-sustaining systems directly mirrors the foundational architectures PFVME was aiming to replicate digitally. And the evidence for this kind of emergent complexity just keeps growing. Take this recent discovery reported by Earth.com, playfully nicknamed DNA doodling. Scientists found that certain enzymes called DNA polymerases can actually build long, repeating genetic chains entirely from scratch, and they do this without needing any pre-existing template to copy from. So even at the most basic, microscopic chemical level, biology naturally generates complex structured patterns from incredibly simple starting materials. It completely validates the core principle of emergence that PFV McKenney was exploring from day one. So the crucial point is, when you step back and look at the big picture, we're seeing a perfect example of what historians of science call simultaneous discovery. This is when multiple independent researchers develop comparable ideas simply because the available objective evidence points them in similar directions. I mean, think about the massive scope here. You have a solo researcher building an experimental AI vision system in a home office, anthropologists at Duke studying ancient primate skulls, neuroscientists in Switzerland measuring brainwave delays, and biologists rethinking the chemical origins of life. They were all walking completely different, isolated paths, but they converged on the exact same scientific destinations. But you might be wondering, how did a solo researcher actually manage to test theories at the speed of a full laboratory to reach these conclusions? The answer is modern artificial intelligence. As the creator noted, AI became an extraordinary engineering partner that transformed philosophical questions into practical experiments. But using advanced tools like ChatGPT and Codex, the researcher could rapidly prototype architectures, analyze deep systemic failures, and rewrite entire foundational systems in weeks instead of years. The AI didn't invent the ideas. It acted as a massive, tireless amplifier for independent thought. Which brings us to our final thought. The barrier to high-level experimental research has been permanently lowered. The heavy tools needed to build, test, and iterate complex ideas are now available to literally anyone with deep curiosity and an internet connection. If an independent researcher, armed with AI as an engineering partner, and a willingness to set aside personal pride to relentlessly follow the facts, can directly mirror the discoveries of the world's top scientific institutions, what truths are you capable of discovering? I really want you to think about that. Until next time, keep observing, keep questioning, and keep exploring.